So there's been all of this chatter around social media over the past few days about this just absolutely gargantuan donation that's been given to some Republican groups. I think the New York Times had a piece on it. David Sirota of the Lever News had a piece on it. I'm just going to give you the Cliff Notes version of it here, but this does effectively say it all. Right-wing mogul funneled $1.6 billion to conservative legal group using shady tax avoidance scheme. So this is like a double whammy here. We have the tax avoidance, so there's a personal greed angle, right? And then there's also the fact that a conservative legal group is flush to the brim with money now, all because of one individual single donor. So Republican politics gets a massive bump because of one individual. Massive corruption. Now you're telling me if this guy's got some thoughts on what should be going on with the GOP and with this legal group, that they're not going to listen to him, they're not going to take his call. Oh, I think they will. Oh, I think they will. And this is the problem, man. This is the problem with our politics. We're going to dive into the article in a second, but I just want to remind everybody or teach everybody about a law that was passed in 1907 called the Tillman Act. You know what that law said? Corporations can't give any money to any federal candidate. 1907, we had that law in place. Why? Because back then, everybody knew, everybody understood the nature of political corruption. Hey, if these corporations are giving money to the politicians are just going to do whatever the corporations want. That is effectively legalized bribery. We can't have that. Let's make it illegal. And they did. That's exactly what they did. And it wasn't until the late 1970s when the Supreme Court stepped in and said, I don't know, you guys can't really do all these different things here. You can't really limit all this money in politics because people have a First Amendment right. The same rights that give you free speech are the same rights that allow a billionaire to buy a politician. I'm not kidding. This is the argument effectively. And so you have Buckley versus Vallejo, you have Bellotti, you have McCutcheon, you have Citizens United, and all of these cases, when you put them together, have just unleashed a tsunami of corporate money and billionaire money in the system. And their argument doesn't make any sense. If you really believe that this is free speech, what you're doing is giving a tiny sliver of the population the loudest voice. You're giving them a microphone and or a megaphone, and you're making everybody else whisper. They are the loudest voices in the room, and they're going to get what they want. And again, I would call that corruption, because I'm a simple dude. Okay, so here's what they say. A right-wing businessman funneled $1.6 billion to a new political group controlled by conservative legal activist Leonard Leo. By the way, that name sounds like an evil movie villain. Leonard Leo. Electronics manufacturing mogul Barry Said donated 100% of the shares of his Chicago-based company Triplight to Leo's group before selling the business to an Irish conglomerate in a transaction that appears to be structured to avoid tax liabilities, reported the New York Times. Quote, it's high time for the conservative movement to be among the ranks of George Soros, Hans-Georg Wyss, Arabella advisors, and other left-wing philanthropists going toe-to-toe in the fight to defend our Constitution and its ideals. All right, let me pause here for a second. First of all, the idea that the right needs to do corruption, the left's doing it, we need to do it. The right is already doing it. The right is already doing it. There's a number of very well-known, right-wing billionaires who donate to politicians and buy our politicians and buy all these think tanks and influence policy in all these terrible ways. So you're already doing it, number one. Number two, I'm sure in terms of the numbers, it's equal to or more than what the Democrats are doing. Number three, if you're sort of admitting that, hey, I don't like what the Democrats are doing here, this is kind of crazy, well, then why would you turn around and say that's why we need to do it? So they're doing something that I view as egregious and wrong and terrible. I hate that George Soros' money is in politics, but I'm going to do the exact same thing. And I'm going to also be bad and wrong and dumb. Oh, God, I hate this race to the bottom bullshit. Leo, who helped... Did I miss any other part here? Hold on. No. Leo, who helped shape the U.S. Supreme Court's 6-3 conservative majority... Oh, great. During his years as executive vice president of the Federalist Society and his nonprofit Marble Freedom Trust, now have more cash on hand than the $1.5 billion spent by the top 15 politically active nonprofit organizations Democratic campaigns in 2020 and nearly double the $900 million spent by 15 of the most politically active GOP groups. So in other words, this guy's acting like, oh, the right is at such a disadvantage because we don't have the George Soroses over here, bro. And then he makes a donation that is more than the 15 most politically active nonprofit Democratic organizations. That is insane. How is this allowed? How can this be allowed? This is crazy. The arrangement is difficult to trace through public records, but a person with knowledge of the matter said Said donated the Trip Light shares to Marble months before the deal with Eaton, a publicly traded Irish company, was announced in January 2021. Marble Freedom Trust is registered as a 501c4 organization that focuses primarily on social welfare and so is exempt from paying taxes. And supporters cannot deduct donations from their income taxes, but they can donate assets the nonprofit can sell and avoid capital gains taxes on the transaction. Quote, these actions by the super wealthy are actually costing the American taxpayers to support the political spending of the wealthiest Americans, said Ray D. Madoff, a professor of tax law at Boston College, with a very unfortunate name if I don't say so myself, Madoff. Groups linked to Leo spent $122 million in 2020 promoting conservative judges, restricting access to abortion, and defending measures to limit voting rights. And Marble had $1.4 billion to spend at the end of April 2021, although it cannot be donated directly to campaigns or party committees. So, look, that's the way that this stuff works. They still launder it through different avenues, because even though we sort of have the wild, wild west in terms of money and politics, there's still little technical rules that need to be followed. But, the loopholes are so big you could drive a Mack truck through it. And effectively what he's doing is exploiting those loopholes, both to do tax avoidance for himself, but also to get this money to where he wants it to go, which is right-wing political causes. So, I need you to stop and think about that. Stop and think about that. You can just have one person with their own ideas. Doesn't matter how wacky their ideas are, how insane they are, how not based on evidence and facts they are. One person could just step in and say, I'm going to buy a political party, or I'm going to buy a think tank, or I'm going to buy a judicial activist group, and I'm going to affect politics more than millions and millions and millions of people put together. Because they're not listening to the grandma from Cleveland who donated $5 to a politician. They're going to listen to this guy. And this guy happens to have incredibly terrible politics. Yeah, and this is, thankfully, there's been a bunch of articles on this, but this will be memory hold. It'll always be memory hold. And it's not like the Democrats are doing much better. They also take money from corporations. They also take money from billionaires. And as a result of that, we have this race to the bottom type thing. We have even the best politicians in there's a handful that are actually good, right? But the dominant strain of thought in the Democratic Party is very limited in scope. It's neoliberal. It is centrist. It is tweaks around the edges. Why? Because of the impact of this corporate money. Just to give one example, Biden wanting, saying I'm in favor of the public option on the campaign trail all the time. When he got to office, never talked about it anymore ever again. Just dropped it from the agenda. Why? He took a lot of money from health insurance companies and they don't want the public option. That's why. He's expanded Obamacare. That's what this IRA did, $64 billion to Obamacare, but no public option. He said he wanted it. Not delivering at all, totally dropped it because of the money. And so you see this stuff all over the place. This is a particularly egregious example, though, because one dude, $1.6 billion. What kind of a system do we have where that makes sense? How is anybody uncomfortable saying that we have an oligarchy when you look at something like this? I think that's the most reasonable interpretation when you look at the fact that one person can spend $1.6 billion and basically buy whatever they want in terms of politics. That's crazy. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.